I apologize perhaps in advance for the following. And that is that sometimes and it's not intentional, but sometimes I don't try to make things about me, but I put myself in situations or positions because sometimes that's my best ability or my best way of relating to things and trying to make things relatable and trying to express my viewpoint or the lens by which I look through things. And there are multiple ways and multiple lenses to look through with this situation with the Indiana Pacers, Tyrese Halliburton, the future, and where you go from here. We've had time now. Last night at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I got a FaceTime from Michael in Australia. Michael and Marcus both. If you listen to this show, you know both these guys, diehard Pacer fans. And it was like this therapy session for them because he's like, we're just now kind of grasping all that's taken place. And I get that. It has been since we talked last 21 hours. It has been since we saw Tyrese Halliburton pounding the floor against the Oklahoma City Thunder some, 40 hours or so. And several things have happened since then. And we will begin with the order chronologically in the way that they happened, not the order in which we learned of them. But to begin with, Tyrese Halliburton yesterday had surgery in New York for his ruptured Achilles. A rupture and a tear, as I understand it, essentially the same thing, but a rupture can be interpreted as being more severe because it is a complete tear of the Achilles. But as Ralph Reif explained to us yesterday, unlike an ACL, unlike other areas of the body, you can do surgery almost immediately because there is less blood development and there's less swelling that takes place. Oftentimes, if somebody has like a rupture of their ACL or in their knee, the athlete will have surgery, say, 2 days later because you have to wait for the swelling to go down to go in. Not the case with the Achilles. So Tyrese Halliburton had his surgery, and then after his surgery last night, he posted a post which we're going to get to, and that's where I'm going to give you my relatability from it in a different viewpoint, in a different standpoint, in a different way, I think, to digest what was said from the standpoint publicly of Tyrese Halliburton. And we're going to get into that. I presume by now that most people have seen his statement, but I will read to you a portion of it in just a few minutes. But what we now know is that between the time that Tyrese Halliburton came out of surgery and the time that he posted to the world about his thoughts coming out of surgery, he also had a conversation via text and then via phone with Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle. And Rick Carlisle, as he has done each and every week over the course of the basketball season, this morning joined the Fan Morning Show with Jeff Rickard, Kevin Bowen, and James Boyd on that program, and started out in answering a question from Kevin Bowen right off the top of explaining and detailing his conversation and his viewpoint and the lens through which he was looking at it on the situation with Tyrese Halliburton. The reason I play this first is because, by all account, the conversation that Rick Carlisle is about to recount for you folks, he had with Tyrese Halliburton before Tyrese Halliburton then brought the fan base of the Indiana Pacers into the conversation with his post on social media. So last night, after Tyrese Halliburton had his surgery, he offered a group text with those that are within his circle of the Indiana Pacers, and then he got a phone call from Rick Carlisle. And Rick Carlisle this morning, just some 4 hours ago, recounted that phone conversation with this radio station. This is from the Fan Morning Show here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. This is Rick Carlisle some 4 hours ago.
He answered the phone on the first half ring, And he said, "Hey, Coach, how you doing?" he sounded totally upbeat, and I said, I'm doing great. How are you doing?" He goes, "I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good." And as I looked at my phone, I saw that he had sent out a message on our group chat of him in the hospital bed, smiling. He may have had a thumbs up sign, and that was to all the guys on our roster, which included our bench coaches. And so that was a very uplifting moment for me. I've had several players that have sustained this injury. JJ Barea sustained this injury when he was in his 30s. He was a point guard. He's a backup point guard. One of the best backup point guards, for me in history. Dwight Powell sustained the injury when he was in his mid to late 20s. We dealt with this with Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman this season. Both of those guys have been back in the gym. And it was interesting. I talked to James Wiseman's agent yesterday, and James has been authorized to do his rehab with us, even though he's not on our roster this year by the league. And I talked to his agent yesterday, and his agent said, "Look, the kid's doing great." I said to him, "How's everything coming?" And he said, "I did a 360 dunk today." And so, so amazing that Tyrese was out of surgery by the time, actually it was inside of 24 hours after Game 7 had begun. And so I can tell you that I feel very, very uplifted by the exchange with Tyrese on the phone, the message that he sent out, etc. It's a daunting thing, to go through something like that if you're the player. It's a daunting thing if you're a loyal fan base, if you're a great fan of the game, all those kinds of things, to witness what happened on television. And so very disappointed for the team that we weren't able to proceed beyond that moment in Game 7 without our full complement of guys. But certainly so proud of the effort. This team, I think we beat 3 teams in the tax, in the first or second apron of the luxury tax in the first 3 rounds to advance to the NBA Finals, which is, an amazing accomplishment. I mean, that speaks to, the magnitude of the level of togetherness that this group had. It speaks to the moments, the unforgettable moments authored by Tyrese and Pascal, and the rest of our group. And so I received more messages during this run. I mean, this is going back to the second round, just randomly from people, just hundreds, as we proceeded through this thing. People just so enamored and enthralled with what they were seeing. And so could not be more proud of a group, and could not be more grateful for our fan base for their undying support of the team and the franchise.
That was Rick Carlisle earlier this morning. Now, after he had that conversation with Tyrese Halliburton, which Carlisle, described there, fortunately, as one where Halliburton was upbeat, Tyrese Halliburton sent the following statement last night on social media. I assume most of you have heard this by now, but I will read you, not all of it, but a few excerpts from it. Quote, "Man, don't know how to explain it other than shock. Words cannot express the pain of this letdown. The frustration is unfathomable. I've worked my whole life to get to this moment, and this is how it ends. Makes no sense. Now that I've gotten surgery, I wish I could count the number of times people will tell me I'm going to, quote, come back stronger, quote. What a cliche, LOL. This blank sucks. My foot feels like dead weight, fam. But what's hurting most, I think, is my mind. Feel like I'm rambling, but I know this is something I'll look back on when I'm through this as something I'm proud I fought through. It feels good to let this blank out without y'all seeing the kid ugly cry. He later goes on to say, Indy, I'm sorry. If any fan base doesn't deserve this, it's y'all. But together we are going to fight like hell to get back to this very spot and get over this hurdle. I don't doubt for a second that y'all have my back, and I hope you guys know that I have yours. I think Kobe said it best when in this same situation, quote, there are far greater issues, challenges in the world than a torn Achilles. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, find the silver lining, and get to work with the same belief, same drive, and same conviction as ever, end quote. And that's exactly right. I will do everything in my power to get back right. He later goes on to say, I'll dust myself off and get right back to being the best version of Tyrese Halliburton. When I read that, let me tell you what jumped out at me. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm none of those things. There are sports psychologists. I'm not that either. I'm just a guy that talks on the radio that loves this city and loves the job that I'm afforded to do. And like anything in life, we hear of things and we interpret them and we then converse about it. The one thing that jumped out at me the most when I read that last night from Halliburton that hit me was, yes, the part about him being right off the box saying he was in shock. And probably when you saw him at the end of the game hugging his teammates and being wheeled from the plane on a wheelchair and waving to fans, he probably was still in shock. But let me tell you what jumped out most to me and what I would like to share with you, the audience, and the fans like myself of this franchise and of Tyrese Halliburton. And this is where I don't mean to make it about me, but I find it my own relatability. Like all of us, I have voicemails saved in my phone. Eddie, do you have voicemails saved in your phone?
I do.
Probably from maybe an elder relative that's since passed or somebody congratulating you for something that was special, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I have not many saved in my phone, but one of the voicemails I have in my phone, and I'll be honest, I play it fairly regularly to myself. When I had a heart attack in October of 2020, yes, I've talked about that a lot, I realize. I got up the next morning. I don't know that I slept a lot the night before, but I was in the situation of Tyrese Halliburton, sitting in a hospital bed in shock. And I'm playing my voicemails. And I had a voicemail from a girl that I'd gone to high school with, was very good friends with, very close with through college. We completely platonically just always had a special friendship between us. She's a year older than I. And Shauna left me a voicemail that I saved, and I'll never forget it, and I've listened to it 1,000 times. And in it, she says, oh, my gosh, Jake, I'm in complete shock. I just saw and read what happened to you. She lives in Chicago now, so we don't talk that often. But then she said something I've never forgotten. She said, I'm so sorry you went through that. And with all due respect and love to all of the people in my life that reached out to me at that time, I think Shauna was the first and only person that left me a message that led the message off by saying that she thought about and had empathy for what I went through. Not how it impacted her, not how scared she was, not how worried she was, but how she thought about how I must have felt. And when I read Tyrese Halliburton's message last night, the natural reaction, and it's not a wrong one, I understand it. Athletes are people that we see on a floor, that we watch perform, that in a complementary fashion are recurring characters in our lives, but we don't know them, very few of us do, face to face. We feel we do, and the great ones we connect with. And Tyrese Halliburton is one of those because he has a personality that is very engaging, infectious, and you connect to it. But most people, when they read Tyrese Halliburton's, and they're not wrong for it, I'm not condemning anybody for this, myself included. You read it, and your first thought is, okay, does it sound like he's going to be able to get back and play? Like, when's he going to be able to get back? Does he feel optimistic? But what jumped out at me was this. I wish I could count the number of times people will tell me I'm going to come back stronger. What a cliche. This sucks. What I read there, and then later, Indy, I'm sorry. If any fan base doesn't deserve this, it's y'all. What I read there was a young man who is getting ready to go through that journey of recovery and rehabilitation from a physical standpoint, that it's all relative. It's all relatable to all of us in some form or fashion. But I kept going back to the voicemail from Shauna. I'm sorry this happened to you. Because when I read that from Tyrese Halliburton, what I was reading was somebody who, without even knowing it, needs to hear this from us, the fan base, needs to hear this from us, the city of Indianapolis, needs to hear this from us, the media. And that is, Tyrese Halliburton, recover at the pace and the fashion that's best for you. Go at your pace. Do what you need to do. Do what you need to do psychologically and physically to get back to being first the person, not that it changes him as a personality, but before the basketball player of being healthy again, having a strong Achilles, walking, cutting, running, etc. Because when he says right there, I wish I could count the number of times people will tell me I'm going to come back stronger. I immediately related to that because all of the people that said to me, like, oh, like, I'm so glad you're healthy. Like, you'll be out running marathons, but in no time. And I remember saying to myself, I hope that's right. I hope that's right. But what if it's not? And I'm going to do everything I can to get back to that situation and that position. But what if I can't? What if my body simply feels different? Am I going to disappoint you? Am I going to let you down? And Tyrese Halliburton right there when he says, if any fan base doesn't deserve this, it's y'all. I'm sorry. Tyrese Halliburton needs to know that he did not let us down. And that if he doesn't come back to 100% the basketball player he was before, he didn't let us down. Because this is the way things happen in life. This is the way, when you shoot a basket in basketball, sometimes it goes in and sometimes it goes out. Michael Jordan's last game is the Chicago Bull against the Utah Jazz, where he pushed off on Byron Russell and took that shot and then sat there and hung in the air, and the Bulls were 1998 world champions. He was 17 of 36 from the floor in that game. Does anybody talk about the shots he missed? He missed a lot of shots. Sometimes they go in, sometimes they don't. I don't know. Tyrese Halliburton doesn't know. His doctors don't know. Nobody knows exactly how his body is going to recover from this. We can hope. We can hope. But the thing that I hope for this fan base, for this city, for this state, is that all of us understand and recognize the fact that Tyrese Halliburton and his recovery and his coming back from this is on the timeline of Tyrese Halliburton. And the rest of us, all we need to do is say, I'm sorry that you're going through that. I'm sorry that that happened to you in that moment. I'm disappointed as a fan that our team didn't win. And I'm disappointed because I love watching you as a player that we didn't get the opportunity to see you go for 30 in that game, which it seemed like inevitably you were about to do. But right there, when I read that statement, what I read was a man who is going to say the right things about his optimism, and he has a glow about him that is a once in every 1,000 person glow. And it's what makes him special as a player and as a leader and as a captain and all of those things. And there's no coincidence, there's no shock, there's no surprise that when Rick Carlisle talks about the Indiana Pacers, he says Pascal and Tyrese, or Tyrese and Pascal. Obi Toppin's a great player. Andrew Nembhard's a great player. Aaron Nesmith's a great player. Miles Turner's a great player. But Pascal Siakam has the experience in the hardware, and Tyrese Halliburton has the glow. He has the it factor. He has the it factor, and that it factor presumably is exactly the thing that is going to lead him back to becoming a healthy basketball player again. But the first step in that is the understanding internally of knowing that he's not going to let anybody down if it doesn't happen. Because nobody can control, nobody knows. Nobody knows, like when you get a cold, how long you're going to be sick. You just don't know. And I felt terribly for him when I read that message, because what I read was somebody who felt like he had a responsibility of recovery to anybody other than himself. And I hope that everybody can recognize and understand that we're sorry of what he went through. We're disappointed of what we went through, but we're sorry of what he went through. And I simply hope that Tyrese Halliburton can focus on and eventually grab hold of those things, of the promise for himself of what he wants to be moving forward. And in that game and in that moment, it was disappointing, but we don't know what he went through. And I read that and thought to myself, that's my concern, is that he needs to understand that it's on his timeline. But we have a lot to talk about today, including kind of where the Pacers go from here. And I don't mean that in the sense of, Eddie, that like disaster has struck, but this does create, in terms of the roster, there are a lot of different ways that we can analyze this, which we will do, because we're going to look over contracts, and we're going to look over, the situations of the advantages of, you have decisions to make of where you're putting your eggs now moving forward. And that's not because they didn't win. That's not because they were 2 quarters shy of a title. That's not because Tyrese Halliburton went down. We'd be having that conversation probably regardless.
Eventually,
because that's what happens in the offseason, right?
Yeah.
That's what the offseason's all about.
It's just accelerated now since they fall short in Game 7 instead of winning it.
And you made a fantastic point yesterday,
I did,
which I failed in giving you the credit and giving you the platform to say it, other than what you said to me during the commercial break as a passing comment. You probably don't even remember what it was, do you?
I probably do. I remember lots of things.
Would you like to guess what it was that you said that I thought was a fabulous point?
That I'm awesome? Duh.
It's okay. No, I said a factual point that you made.
Yeah, I'm awesome. Duh.
You made the point.
Rick Carlisle highlighted it during the course of their interview with the morning show this morning as well. I'm sure you're alluding to the comment that I made to you, that just how big it was, of course, not knowing at the time that it would be this big, but for the Pacers to give up their pick in this year's draft, the 23rd pick, and gain their 2026 unprotected first-round pick back from New Orleans.
Yes. Huge. And because that was going to be the 30th pick or something, right?
No, it would have been wherever their record lied.
That's my point. What I'm saying is that 2 weeks ago, presumably at the end of next year, they would have been drafting with that pick. Okay, that the 2026 Pacers first-round pick would have been at the very end of the first round, because presumably they come back next year and they're going to be a 1, 2, or 3 team in the league, right?
Well, perhaps, yeah.
And what I'm saying is now, I don't think they're going to be bottom of the barrel by any stretch. But that now realistically may be 10 or 12 spots even better than it was at the time that they acquired it.
Heck, you can be a play-in team and move into the lottery like the Dallas Mavericks did.
Yeah, you're right. It's 100,000 to 1 or something like that Cooper Flagg's going number 1 overall? It's not that much, but it's significant, right? If you put down $10 that Cooper Flagg will not be the first player picked in the draft, what do you get?
Let me look.
It's substantial, I believe. Coming up on the program today, Stephen Holder going to join us at 1 o'clock. Scott Agnes going to join us at 2 o'clock. And plenty to unpack and kind of move forward when we take a look now at where things lie for the Pacers. And one bit of optimism in all of this from yesterday that I want to replay as well, because I think it factors into what you decide to do, and I'm going to tell you what I think is the best course of action for this Pacers team. We'll do it on the other side here. It's a Tuesday edition, Query & Company on the Fan.
And I wanted to catch up and just say that I'm so grateful that you're okay.
The rest of that, Eddie, is where she says, "I'm sorry you went through that." That was the key there of.
I'm sorry that you went through that.
There we go.
I literally was speechless when I.
And that's my point. I've saved that voicemail forever because, and that was my point when I read the Tyrese Halliburton message was he sounded like a guy that felt like he owed it to everybody else their timeline on his recovery. And it's not about that. It's about, I'm sorry you went through that and come back on your timeline, Tyrese Halliburton. And you hope and you believe that he will come back at 100%. There are certain things that go into play. Do we happen to have the Ralph's comments from yesterday, Eddie? There are things that come into play that benefit Tyrese Halliburton in terms of that, because you have to now analyze that. This is Ralph Reef yesterday when we had him on the program talking about the one thing that may benefit Tyrese Halliburton in the recovery from an Achilles surgery.
I have no doubt in my mind and in my gut that Halliburton will return to an elite level as a basketball player. He's 25 years old. He'll be 26 by the time all this completes itself. So there's great value in that age of healing. Of what I know about him, and I do not know him personally, but what I read and hear from others, he's going to take care of himself. He's always taken care of himself. He's a high quality lifestyle guy, and so he's going to. So what's that mean? He's going to sleep. He's going to eat the right things. He's going to ingest the right things. He's going to be compliant with protocols, and so. Those are all huge factors in all of this. And I have seen a lot of elite athletes with injury, severe injuries. And we could name a lot of them that we all know about. But elite athletes are elite human beings. And elite human beings, such as these athletes, they have a healing component about them that fits in that elite category. It may sound funny, but it is not. There's a mentality, there's a mindset, there's a physiology, a biology that is just at a different makeup than an average athlete. And so what we see in the elite athlete, their return to play, their return to recover, and now it becomes commonplace, Jake. I mean, we see things all the time in the NFL, the NHL, NBA, where, things that you and I would limp around the high school for weeks. And they're back from game to game.
Right.
And so there's an elite component that I have seen too many times to deny it.
So that, and I think the age is the key point there that Ralph Reef points out in terms of the Halliburton injury recovery. For the Pacers now, I'm not going to say that they're at a fork in the road. That would be hyperbole. But I think if you are Kevin Pritchard, you're Chad Buchanan, you're Rick Carlisle, you have to look now at, you have a decision to make, and Herb Simon for that matter. And that decision to make is what exactly you want to do in the present. If you think of the Eastern Conference, I was talking earlier today and said this. There was a window that opened up in the Eastern Conference. One side of, so that if everybody in the Eastern Conference is sitting in the kitchen and there's a window that's opened up, and to get to a deep run, you've got to get through the window out into the yard. And there are teams, when you look at next season, that one would assume already had 1 foot out the window. Cleveland certainly seems to be one that has a foot out the window. New York, with their coach influx, had a foot out the window and then maybe stepped back into the room for a little bit. but you assume that they're going to be able to also just kind of leap themselves out through the window. Orlando and Detroit are two teams that are sitting there giving each other like the little kid booster lift because they're growing up. And they're growing up to the point where they're going to be able to get through that window presumably very soon here without a lot of challenge. But then you have Boston, you have Milwaukee. You know, those teams are sitting there. They're now holding the window open saying, go ahead. They're holding the door open for everybody. Go ahead. You know, Jason Tatum is out. Jaylen Brown's still a wonderful player. But Boston's making some moves. They just sent out Drew Holiday, who's their defensive stopper. I know he's older. And they did get a good player back in him, or for him. But Boston presumably is sitting there kind of letting everybody go through the window and holding it for them.
By the way, Jaylen Brown also had off-season surgery on his knee. They're optimistic he'll be able to return at the start of the season, but there's no guarantees.
And he missed a lot of games too, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so Indiana now is in that same situation. And the Pacers have a decision to make. And I believe their best decision is this. Now, I'm not the one that is signing the checks. I'm not the one that is balancing the books. I'm not the one that is having to navigate through all of that and figuring out the timelines. And yes, Ralph Reif was talking about how Tyrese Halliburton is 25 years old and will be 26 years old when he comes through all of this. And they have a roster that is primarily players that are young and are going to be all kind of simultaneously in their prime or peaking of their prime. They have a couple that maybe are not yet to their prime. And they have a couple that, you know, you forget. And the blueprint is there in terms of timeline of an estimation how long Tyrese Halliburton will be out. Look at Isaiah Jackson. And Isaiah Jackson doesn't rely on foot burst maybe the way that he does have it, the way that Tyrese Halliburton needs to rely on it. Pascal Siakam, even though the thought was, or the selling feature on Pascal Siakam at the time he was acquired was that he didn't have the mileage on him that a lot of players at his age or experience level have had. He has more of it on him than do the other players on the roster. But there's one key thing that I think comes into play in what I think is definitive on the way the Pacers play this hand. And I'm going to tell you exactly what that is and the player it may most benefit when we come back. So I will admit, as I told you, Eddie, this is an incredibly catchy song, right?
It
and
is.
I hear it everywhere now, and I don't know because I'm old, right? Is this song like current, or is this like 5 years ago old and I'm just now hearing of it?
It's current.
It's everywhere now, right?
It's current. I think it was released in the end of 2024, so it's less than a year old.
You know, it's like the YMCA. It's this anthem, right? But which I didn't know, but neither here nor there. All of a sudden, I just started hearing it like in commercials and
I think it technically
TV
released
shows in 23, right?
in August of 23.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think it really surfaced into popularity until the end of 2024.
By the way, HOTTOGO, we're all going to be hot to go when it comes to taking to the golf links at the Legends Golf Club coming up Thursday, August 7th. 10 o'clock tee time for the Fan Invitational Golf Outing. I'll be out there. JMV will be out there. Kevin Bowen will be out there. Jeff Rickard will be out there. Eddie, I presume you'll be out there, although we'll be doing our shows out there, I would assume. But we would love to have you out for a day on the golf course to come out, swing around, and listen, you don't have to be Jack
Ticket
Nicklaus.
sales
You don't
just
have to be Tiger
plummeted
Woods.
because you said I would not be out there. Trust me.
No. We would love to have everybody out. Find out more information at our website, of course, 1075thefan.com. Get your clubs ready and join us. Be a lot of fun out there to play golf, talk sports, hang out, and have fun. One of the things we'll be talking about is where the Pacers go from here, and here's what I have determined.
What have you determined, Jake? That I'm awesome?
No. It's about known entities.
I'm a known entity.
The Pacers are admittedly, especially financially, at a bit of a crossroad. Now, one of the things that they can do is they can apply for the disabled player exception to get salary cap relief. And what that means is if a player is expected to be out for an entire season due to injury, which presumably Tyrese Halliburton will be, they can apply for an exception that allows teams, now this is the thing about it though, to sign or acquire a replacement player even if they are over the salary cap up to a certain limit. So I would assume what that means is when Miles Turner's contract is expired and he is technically then a complete unrestricted free agent, perhaps they can use in the form of not going over the cap, but the way that it works with that is if a player, this is very nuanced, I realize, okay? But the value that you can get back in that relief is capped. It has a ceiling to it at either half the injured player's salary or the mid-level exception amount, whichever is less. So one would presume because Halliburton's salary is going to be for this coming season, I don't, what is it, 52 or something million? The mid-level exception probably is somewhere around like 18 or 20 million, which means they would go with the 18 or 20 million would be the amount that they get relief. So if they sign Turner, they get a $20 million cushion that would prohibit them from being taxed over the salary cap. But I believe when you look at this roster, the Pacers and the way they played this year was exceptional. The chemistry that they have with this group is so rare, and that's what made them unique. And that's what made them great, is the sum was better than the individual parts. And the individual parts are very good, don't get me wrong. But Obi Toppin set to make $15 million. And you say, gosh, do you stick with that or do you move that to get yourself even more flexibility? Miles Turner now, gosh, Halliburton's gone. Turner's getting older. Do we really want to go into the tax or have to navigate through all of these financial murky red tape things, not knowing what our next year is going to look like in terms of our competitiveness? And my answer to all of it is yes. Because you go with the known entity. And while you don't know that Tyrese Halliburton will be back to primary Tyrese Halliburton, no one knows that. Basketball and sports in general and team building is oftentimes about taking risk anyway. What you do know is that, let's say you're 80% certain that Tyrese Halliburton will return to Tyrese Halliburton form. That's better than going out and trading for, Lonzo Ball and having him fill in and taking we're 70% sure he could be 90% the player Halliburton is. So you go through next year and you keep your core intact. And that includes Miles Turner, who I know struggled in the finals, but a lot of that was about matchup, and a lot of that, truthfully, is I don't think that he was totally healthy from his illness. But he is still an important part of what they do and the way they play. And in more series than not, he was a critical piece that lifted them. Benedict Mathurin, to me, is interesting because in the way that the Pacers play, Benedict Mathurin's best games and his biggest contribution came when the gears that were turning that makes the Pacers offense unique and unguardable were cogged up. Benedict Mathurin is like a Lucas Oil supplement. When the gears were turning and there was like coagulation of like dried oil, Benedict Mathurin was like the Lucas Oil cleanser that comes in and washes that clear and then until the gears can start going again. So Mathurin plays offensively in terms of his isolation and his ability to just drive to the basket and get fouled, kind of away from the Pacers' offense. And if you look at his best games and where he bailed them out because their offense, the way they were being guarded, just wasn't running. And so it's like, okay, now it's Mathurin's turn to go in there and just get his. With Halliburton now out, you put Mathurin in to kind of replace him. You move, say, Nembhard to the point. You put Mathurin in at the 2, for example, but he's getting more minutes, and just through osmosis alone, but through repetition, he's getting more conditioned now to working himself into their offense. Yes, I was one that probably thought Mathurin was going to be flipped here at the end of the year for future assets. I don't know about that now because he is an asset you need now. But what you do next year is you are literally going out and you're still running the same style. You're still running the same offense. And yes, the pace in which they play is largely facilitated by Halliburton. I get that. But you still have guys that can run. Nesmith can still run and shoot. Toppin can still run. Nembhard can still run that offense. McConnell can, although McConnell, I think, oftentimes, as we saw, gets deep into the paint, and then he kind of goes away from also that high circular motion offense that they run. But you get Mathurin those minutes, and now the minutes that Mathurin was getting before off the bench are going to Jarris Walker. So what you do is you maintain and you kind of, I hate to say tread water, but you stay status quo with the way you're doing things, both in personnel and approach. And then when Halliburton is healthy for the 26-27 season, you take the first up to Thanksgiving-ish or beyond, maybe towards Christmas, of reacclimating, just like they did this year with Nesmith and Nembhard out. And then what you have at the end of that season, yes, instead of a 3-year window to push through with Halliburton and Siakam, maybe you're down to 1 season, maybe 2. But what you have is an offense of what you had this year with the complement now of a more ingrained and more involved Benedict Mathurin within it. Benedict Mathurin is like AFib. Like, he's the guy that when he comes in and all of a sudden, like, the rhythm goes off. Not in a bad way, but the way he plays, it's like it goes through this rhythm change, and then all of a sudden, then he comes out, and then everything slows back down, and your heart's back in rhythm again. And that's kind of what he is in terms of that offense. But you get him involved as a starter all the time and get him acclimated there. And then when Halliburton comes back, he is coming back to a group that is not only the same group that was there when he went down, but one that is seemingly strengthened because of the more repetition. And I'm curious to see, Eddie, what Jarris Walker does, right? He's the other one that I'm very curious to see what he does.
What about Johnny Furphy?
Furphy's another one. I will tell you this. The Pacers brass and the front office of the Pacers love Johnny Furphy, in particular for his wing defense and his wingspan defense, honestly. And he's a shooter, but that's another one. I mean, good point. If you look at if you just move everybody up one, so Mathurin now moves up one rung, he's now a starter. Walker moves up one, and he's now like your 6th or 7th man. So Furphy gets the minutes that you saw Walker getting this year. Situational, rotational minutes at times. Maybe some games he doesn't get on the floor. The next night he's getting 12 to 14 minutes.
By the way, the mid-level exemption this year is projected to be around $14 million.
So basically what that means is that the Pacers would get for a $14 million voucher, right? They get a $14 million voucher to spend on somebody. So if they, presumably, if I understand it, if they sign Miles Turner to a $30 million contract per year, then $16 million of that would hurt them on the books this year.
No. It's only applied to one player. You can't use it for it's not like a discount card on Turner. It would be for a player.
So see, I don't know in that regard that it helps them.
So
I don't know.
For example, if they used it, would Russell Westbrook be a player? Like 1 year, $14 million. That's an example.
I get it. No, I get it. But like I said, I don't think in that regard it helps them.
The other aspect, too, of this is that if
it would help them if they were a player away right now. They're not. The player away that they are is texting with Rick Carlisle right now.
Right. And the other aspect, too, of this, Jake, is that if they are a team that is in the luxury tax, then that mid-level exemption drops to $5.7 million. It doesn't stay at 14 even if they go into the tax.
And I think they're going to here's the thing. I think the Pacers were prepared to go into the This is the bottom line. Stephen Holder next. Bottom line is this. The Indiana Pacers and their ownership, I believe, were prepared to go into the luxury tax. For those that are unfamiliar, the luxury tax is a penalty that you pay, essentially, if you are over the salary cap. I believe that they were willing and prepared to go into the luxury tax for this coming season to retain Miles Turner because they believed that Miles Turner was an important part of what they thought was going to be a championship contending team. Now the question becomes, are they still willing to do that to maintain and retain Miles Turner for a continued championship viability that is now delayed by a year, and thus eat that tax for a year to put themselves in position beyond that? That's the question that only they will know the answer to. Stephen Holder is next. I think that we are figuring out that this is Eddie Garrison's favorite song. You play this song a lot, and it's a great song.
I don't play it a lot.
It's a great
no.
song.
It's not my top 5.
Really? What's your top 5?
Any combination of Van Halen and Bon Jovi. There you go.
Wait, like the two of them together?
I don't think that ever happened, but
I did see yesterday a video of David Lee Roth in concert for the first time in quite some time, and let me say, there's a reason it's been quite some time. Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that intro, he is on the Rhinegeist Brewery guest line. You, of course, read his work, see his work at ESPN and ESPN.com in the inverse order in which I just said that. He covered the NBA Finals, the NBA playoffs, and he is, of course, the beat writer for the Colts, Stephen Holder, joining the show. Stephen, how are you?
I'm doing well. A lot quieter, I suppose, this week than recent weeks, but I digress.
You know, here's what's interesting. And let's start on the Pacers side of things, Stephen, because you have covered, and listen, part of our job is the analysis, the prognostication, the deciphering of injury and bounce backs and things like that. It goes without saying, with Tyrese Halliburton, it was terrible to see, no question. And I mentioned earlier, when I read his statement, the thing that jumped out at me, Stephen, was I was reading his statement as a guy that truly felt like he had let down a large group of people. And I think that from a health standpoint, it is so important to have that epiphany of realizing that one's recovery is on the timeline of themselves and not having to worry about in the stress of with everybody else. Leave it up to us to figure out how long it'll be, so to speak, right? That said, have you covered many athletes who have come back from an Achilles, not based on timeline, but based on probability that they can return to 100% of what we saw prior injury?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's actually become a much more common injury in football, in fact, which is my main bread and butter. And so we have dealt with it quite a bit. And I, as an aside, I have no idea if this is a thing or not, but it does feel, at least, like we are dealing with more of them today. I don't know if that's true, and I don't know how to determine that, sort of statistically or what have you. But I would say, just in my professional career, it feels as if I'm dealing with these injuries, the Achilles specifically, a lot more frequently today. The one good thing is they used to be a devastating injury, and I mean career-altering, right? If you had an Achilles, we talked about you like you had a life-threatening disease, okay? We in the media. Now, that is no longer the case. It's still a very, very difficult injury. But we have come a long way. I've actually written about this because the Colts, they love guys who have past Achilles injuries. They just had an accumulation of those guys on their roster over the last few years. And one of the things that I learned in writing about it is that the medical techniques in repairing it have improved quite substantially. And the timeline is a little bit quicker now. But still, you're not the same immediately after recovery, and it does take some time, generally speaking, to become the player you used to be. But you can get back, but you have to have patience, and it does not happen sometimes that initial season. It might take a couple.
One of the things, Stephen, that I'm curious about, and to your point, Stephen Holder, our guest, Rhinegeist Brewery guest line here. To your point, I don't know that there's any way to know this answer. But if you look back to, I'll just say 1985, okay? Isaiah Thomas and Michael Ray Richardson and, even Bernard King, they all played positions that were somewhat rooted to their size. And what I mean by that is, Kevin Durant, and I don't mean because of the fact that he had the Achilles as well, but we are now seeing 6'7", 6'9", 7-foot men at 265 pounds with 4% body fat. And they are moving with gazelle-like agility that while the rest of their body facilitates for that movement, the Achilles still is like the most fragile of pieces that is now having to support a movement that is fairly unprecedented for the mass of a human at that size, and maybe organically is not designed to move and cut at the rate in which the NBA now does, and that's why we see it more now than we did 30 years ago? Or is that just me completely like sitting staring at the ceiling at 3:18 in the morning thinking up weird theories?
Well, I have no doubt you do that, but listen, but it makes for good radio sometimes, right? But I would say this: so obviously the initial answer is, of course, I don't know. However, what I would say is, my theory is that you're onto something, and I've thought about this too. Like when I brought this up just a second ago, one of the things that I wondered was why. Or of course, right? You always wonder that, and my suspicion. And it's just a suspicion, I don't know, but using my long medical expertise, my long years of medical expertise, it informs me. I would say I wonder if a couple things. Number one of the things that you said, right? The way guys play, the fact that they are playing different positions, bigger guys playing different positions, that could be a factor. The other thing I wonder about is the type of training that athletes that athletes put themselves through today is why we have bigger, stronger, faster athletes. It's not that they're better than the athletes of 30 years ago. It's that they train differently than the athletes of 30 years ago. So more torque, more speed, more power being generated. Does that have any impact on it? I don't know, but I think it's certainly a question you have to ask if you're someone who sort of researches these things, right? But I would say they're not the same as they used to be. Their bodies are functioning differently than they used to, right? Than the athletes we watched in our childhood, because of the way they train. So then it stands to reason that there could be some residual effects from that in terms of how the body absorbs all of that. I don't know, but it is an interesting debate. I'm very curious if there's someone who knows more about this than us. There probably is.
If you're the Pacers, do you now, I'm not going to say blow up, do you alter your roster, or do you say, you know what, we're just going to push in for next year, status quo, and wait on Halliburton for whenever it is that he is ready to come back, and at that point we push it back in and run it back with this group?
I think it's such a tough call, man, and I actually don't think there's a wrong answer here, because I can justify either position, right? I really can. But I also would say if they made the decision to say, look, let's double down and let's try to make something happen, there is a very good argument for them to do that. I mean, the strength of their team, what was it this year? It was not Tyrese Halliburton. He was certainly a part of it, a huge part, the biggest part. But the real strength of their team was their team.
Correct. It was the spontaneous tsunami, right?
Yes. Yes. If you take away, look, you can't take away Tyrese's big shots this spring. Of course you can't, right? But let's not pretend like he's the only one that hit big shots, right? I mean, Andrew Nembhard, like, the world never saw him coming. I mean, we were less surprised, but we were still surprised, okay? So my point is, their strength and I think their identity is 1 through 15. That is their identity, is the true essence of a team. And that's why I love this team so much. I know I'm not supposed to have favorites, right? But I'm just going to be honest. Like, you cover lots of teams in your career, and you've done this for many years too, right? And most of it is humdrum. 3 or 4 years later, that team has no significance to you, right? That collection of guys. That's not going to be the case for me with this team. Like, I'm going to remember being around this team, because they were so different. They were a throwback for me. And I think that is their identity. And I would be surprised if they do not lean into what has literally become their identity, which is our 1 through 15 is better than yours, and that's how we're going to win.
Right.
So that's their identity. Why cower and why go away from that now? I would understand it, don't get me wrong, but I think it would be a little bit hypocritical if they did pivot and go a different direction.
Okay, I'm going to pivot from basketball to football, but I'm going to do so by bridging the two of them together with a question that I've asked on the air to Eddie a couple of times. Stephen Holder, I want you to answer it. Kevin Durant we now know has been traded, I think, to the Rockets. He's going to be the final piece for Houston, like he was the final piece for the Nets, and he was the final piece for the Suns, and et cetera.
Exactly.
Is Kevin Durant now football's Aaron Rodgers?
Ooh. Or is it Brett Favre? I mean, same thing, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it could be. I think is the juice worth the squeeze or whatever? I mean, like there's no drama necessarily that comes with him. I'm not saying that. So they're not alike in that regard.
You're talking about Durant. There's no drama, correct?
Right. Like let's be honest. Like with Durant, or excuse me, with Aaron Rodgers, you're going to get some things that come along with that, right? And you have to be willing to take that on. But so you don't get that with Durant necessarily, right? He's going to show up, he's going to play ball, and he's going to tweet a couple things, where his feelings get hurt, and that's about it. But in terms of the money you're paying him and all of the attention and all that, it just hasn't paid off for the last couple of teams. That's for sure. The attention and the conversation around it and all of the things that are associated with acquiring him proved to be much more that proved to be much bigger than the actual results. So I think there's something in what you're saying there. I mean, the New York Jets would argue that, yeah, we got a lot of attention out of that and not much else, right? So I'm very interested to see how it goes with Pittsburgh. I would say this in closing on this topic. I do think the Steelers, speaking of teams, right, they have an adequate amount of talent that they could be a very competitive team this year. I expect that they will be. They're well coached, all that. I could see a scenario where Aaron Rodgers does make a concerted difference for them. But I would say the recent results do make you think, man, is there more to it than just him being a good player? I don't know. It remains to be seen.
Stephen, Anthony Richardson, speaking of quarterbacks, and I'm not going to say drama, but storylines. Anthony Richardson recently now has said that the recent setback that prohibited him from working out with his team was not really a big setback. It was, I think I'm paraphrasing here. It was a bump in the road. We've heard this line before. Fact or fiction? It was a bump in the road for Anthony Richardson.
No, I actually don't disagree. I think that's true in terms of just pure in the purely physical sense, right? In other words, the shoulder in the long term, in the grand scheme, is probably fine. I don't think it's a big deal in that regard. I agree with that. And that's what I heard as well. That was the sense that I got. No one was jumping out of a window worried that, his career was over. However, I think what you also have to consider is it's not just that it happened and is it serious or not, right? I think it's bigger than that. And it's another sort of reminder, I guess, for lack of a better word, or just another episode in a series of them. And so if you're the Colts, why is Daniel Jones here? He's here, yeah, because Anthony Richardson has been inconsistent. That is true. But I think the bigger reason he's here, is because they are concerned about injury. And he has not consistently been on the field. I think if he were healthy for the last 2 years and he was an up and down player, I think they'd let this ride and they would see whether they could get him to the finish line in 2025. I think that's just my personal opinion. But I think the problem that he has is that he's battling two sets of optics. The optics that, okay, you're not progressing as fast as we want, and then number two, you have this consistent issue where you're always hurt. So it only reinforces that latter part in the psyche of the organization. And that is problematic for Anthony Richardson, and that sets him back in the battle, I think, against Daniel Jones.
If you put truth serum in Shane Steichen, do you think Shane Steichen thinks there's a quarterback battle currently?
That's a great question. I do a lot of reading between the lines and body language and trying to decipher what people are really saying, right? That's a big part of our job, for better or worse, right or wrong. And I try not to not to take leaps, okay, because that's not responsible. But I would say that my read of the situation, this is me reading Shane Steichen, okay? So it's not a report. I don't know what he thinks in his heart of hearts. I think he's leaning toward Daniel Jones. I really do. And probably strongly. That's just me saying that. I believe that's where he's at. Now, we have a long way to go. And Anthony Richardson is too talented to not make this at least a hard decision, I think. Right? I mean, I think he's going to get in training camp, and he's going to do some things, right? I mean, he's a good player. I mean, he's a talented player. He's got to pull it together. But I think in the grand scheme, what I hear from Shane Steichen consistently is, I need consistency. It's his favorite word, and I think it's code for Anthony is too up and down, and he is.
If you
I
were
don't
to
think
put
that's wrong.
If you were to put Truth Serum and Chris Ballard, do you believe that he thinks there's a quarterback competition?
I think he probably leans more toward this being a competition because they have different goals. They have different objectives. Their jobs are different, right? I mean, the coach and the GM, right? It's not new. It's true everywhere. But I think in this particular situation, you have a coach who the coach is judged by one bottom line. You got to win. That's it. Now, so is the general manager, but it's a little more complicated than that, right? He has to also position the team for the future and et cetera, right? While also winning. And one of the ways you do that in terms of positioning the team for the future is having an answer at quarterback. And if they don't have one coming out of this season, well, that reflects very poorly on the general manager, right? It doesn't reflect on the coach per se, even though Shane Steichen clearly, and we know this, had a huge hand in drafting Anthony Richardson. But ultimately, just the way the game works, the way we judge the different parties, it reflects more poorly on the guy who drafts him, right? That's just the way it works. So Shane Steichen, this is me talking, and I think just reading the situation. My belief is Shane Steichen sees this as like, for him, it's a zero-sum game. I just got to win. I don't care how we get there. If you're the general manager, how you get there probably matters.
Right.
Right? So that's where I'm at with it.
Stephen, you said the word that Shane Steichen keeps using is consistency. How would Anthony Richardson prove consistency in these practices and training camps that are more scripted towards probably Daniel Jones? And if Anthony were to take the starting job back before week 1, how do you evaluate consistency during that stretch to get to that point?
Well, I mean, there are all kinds of unknowns there, right? I think one of the things that this quarterback battles in general, I think, are difficult to assess because you're getting just glimpses. One guy gets the first team reps one day, the next guy gets them the next day. So it's not even really that easy to be consistent from day to day because you're working with different players from one day to the next. You are maybe going against a more difficult defense one day, maybe the second team backups the next day, right? So it's by design or by nature, these things are difficult to assess. How am I assessing consistency under those circumstances, right? I think that's a difficult thing. The other thing, and I don't think this is exactly what you asked, but if you did have a situation where the quarterback battle was close, I think what they have created, I'm not saying they've gone about this wrong, I'm just saying this is maybe an unintended consequence. What will ultimately happen is every time somebody has a bad game, caller's going to call into this show asking for the other guy to play, right? The crowd's going to boo one quarterback and ask for the other quarterback, right? And so now you're consistently in this wind tunnel, I guess, of voices one way versus the other way. And I don't know. This has the potential to be a very long season and a messy situation to a degree. Again, I'm not saying they're wrong. They had to do what they had to do, but there are some potential unintended consequences.
Stephen, since you now get Stephen Holder, our guest, ESPN.com. In conclusion here, I'm assuming that you get finally some time to take a deep breath before everything really gets going in earnest here. You got vacations planned? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm actually talking to you from New York. my brother and sister live in the greater New York area, just coincidentally. My parents are up here visiting my sister, so I'm hanging out up here. I'll be back. Actually, be back tonight, and then got another trip coming up in a couple weeks. So I hope to not see any of you very much at all in the next few weeks.
Are you going into the city? Like, are you in New York City, or are you in like outside New York?
My brother works in Manhattan. Lives in Westchester, north of the city. So we were in the city over the weekend. I love New York City. It is my favorite city probably in the world. Well, I haven't been to them all, but it's one of my favorite places. I get it. It's not for everybody. I meet lots of people in Indiana who are like, I hate that place. It's fine. I get it. But I love New York City. It is, you have to understand New York City. And I know that this is not the reason we're on this call, but I just had to throw that in there. It's very near to my heart. When I was a kid, look, everybody knows that I have roots in Florida, but when I was a kid, my grandparents, when they came to the United States from the Caribbean, they moved to Brooklyn. So my childhood summers were spent in Brooklyn, sitting on the stoop with my uncles, going to the bodega, getting the Italian ices. My aunts and my uncles, they were still in like high school and college back then. So I have great memories in New York City, and I will always love it.
I love everything about New York City.
It's a vibe. It's just a vibe that you got to understand it. You got to understand, You either get it or you don't. And it's okay if you don't, but I love New York City.
Now, I will say this. When I lived in New York, that is the only place I've ever lived, and believe me, right now in Indiana this is applicable, but it's the only place I've ever lived where I think I showered 3 times a day.
No, there is a thing to that. Big cities – Big cities with lots of concrete. That's just a reality. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I remember Paris in the summer a few years ago, and I know you've been, but like I don't know if you've been in the summer. Like you go to Paris in the summer, good luck. You're gonna die. You know what I mean? This is what it is. You will take several showers. I'm sure. I've heard that about Italy as well and all that. So
have you been to Barcelona?
I have not, but I can imagine.
Barcelona is fascinating to me because it has. In Barcelona, there is one area where you would swear you're in Miami, one area where you would swear you're in Los Angeles, and one area where you would swear that you were in Greenwich Village, New York. That's what I loved about it. It's great.
Yeah, it's on my list because I love cities that just have like this international nature about them, and that's New York City. You know what I mean? It's just what do you want to eat tonight? Oh, I mean, give me an hour and I'll figure it out.
No question.
I love that about it.
No question. All right, Stephen, enjoy the vacation. Get back safely. All right.
All right, see you guys.
All right, Stephen Holder joining us, Ryan Geist Brewery guest line. We come back, we will get more into the discussion we were just having about the Pacers. And I know that it's kind of a tired topic, but since we're talking NFL, I mentioned Kevin Durant. There's actually news today regarding Aaron Rodgers. And I sometimes I hesitate to mention Aaron Rodgers because, nobody wants to hear his name all the time. But it is interesting, one of the things that came out today about him. I'll tell you next. Eddie going with his Van Halen here. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Van Halen actually played Eddie Garrison's birthday party
Do you
with money he got from rescuing Brooke Shields. What's that?
have I ever told you that most of our audience knows this, but I don't know if you know this. I was named after Eddie Van Halen.
I knew that, yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah, I knew that.
Okay.
We were this close. I mean, this close to this show being produced by David Lee Garrison.
Let's see. My brother's middle name is David.
Really?
Yeah.
David Lee Roth born in?
He was born in Indiana, right?
Yes,
And
where?
I can't remember which city.
Bloomington.
Okay.
And then moved to Newcastle until he was 11. And then
For some reason, I wanted to say Lafayette. I don't know why.
That's Izzy Stradlin and Axl Rose. Lived in Newcastle and then moved to Massachusetts before becoming a music star. Okay, so Aaron Rodgers has announced, listen, Aaron Rodgers is a great football player. There's no denying it. And he has one of my favorite quotes ever on a draft night when
Discount double check? Oh, wait, never mind.
also good because, believe me, when your name is Jake, you hear everything there is to hear about State Farm. But,
Is that so?
oh my goodness. I want to know just what we think the odds are that this is true, okay? Aaron Rodgers claims that this one-year deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers is probably his last year in the NFL. Look, I thought it was great when he was coming out of the draft and coming out into the draft out of California, and everybody thought San Francisco was going to take him, and they didn't, and so he slid and slid and slid, and then he got drafted by Green Bay and was asked, you know, how do you feel, how disappointed are you that the San Francisco 49ers passed on you? And he said, not as disappointed as the San Francisco 49ers are going to be. It's a great line. And he has been, over the course of his career, a phenomenal player. But at 41 years old, and, you know, how everything went south in New York, I think the thing about him that to me is just having nothing to do with football. At some point when someone has a pattern in their life where they are on the outs with and they are in like a stalemate with every person close to them. And I know that he supposedly just got married, but you know, he never talks to his family. And so, well, you got to, you know, we don't know the family dynamics. Okay, then he's been engaged multiple times, and then those went south. I mean, we never know relationships. I get it. And then each franchise that he's been a part of, it's, well, I got to decide if I want to come back. I'm like, what do you mean if you want to? You're under contract. It's just constant drama. He's a great player, and you know, in interviews and such, has a fun personality at times. But he just, after a while, is totally exhausting. And truthfully, you mark my words. Is today the 23rd or 24th?
It is Check's calendar, Tuesday, June 24th.
Okay. So if today is Tuesday, June 24th, I'm prepared to say right now on record that on this, the 24th of June, 2025, on a Tuesday at 1:37 p.m.,
Okay.
I, Jake Query, am here to declare
Hi, Jake Query.
that
What are you
Aaron
declaring?
Rodgers with the Pittsburgh Steelers will have a 500 or slightly better season. In the 17 games on the Pittsburgh Steelers schedule, he will play in 14 or fewer. And if they make the playoffs, they will win a playoff game. And then Aaron Rodgers will go on to something different next year, and Pittsburgh is right back to square one. And it kind of goes into, like, you look at the Pacers. You look at the Colts, whatever it might be. Eventually, you know that the time has come where you have to rip off the Band-Aid and quit doing the year-to-year, you know, you have choices in sports. The Colts had a choice. Yeah, I get it. Andrew Luck retired in an untimely fashion. Sure, get it. But they went and they got they did the Band-Aid, they did Jacoby Brissett, and then they did Phillip Rivers, and then they did Matt Ryan. And eventually they said to themselves, we've got to rip off the Band-Aid here. We've got to move forward. And then they went and they get Anthony Richardson. And, are they at the point now where they've realized that instead of the Band-Aid, they need a gauze? I don't know. That's entirely possible. Who knows? They may redirect here, and maybe Daniel Jones is the guy, and then are you back to square one? That's entirely possible. But knowing with a timeline when the time has come to quit doing Band-Aid stuff, with the Pacers, one of the things that was, I think, one of the most underappreciated aspects of pro sports is how, and we became so accustomed to Indiana being great as a franchise and stable that we took it for granted. But it is amazing to think that the Indiana Pacers went from an NBA Finals appearance to 5 years later, an Eastern Conference Finals appearance with almost entirely a different roster. And that transition seamlessly, a blending from one to the next, it happened so seamlessly, it's like you didn't even notice it. And all of a sudden you're like, man, here they are. And now they're young. They've got Jermaine O'Neal and Ron Artest, and they made a move for Steven Jackson and Jamal Tinsley. And say what you want about those guys. I think now those things have been mended there, right? I think this run had so much to do with that. This run had so much to do with reconnecting and just configuring relationships with this city and that franchise. But now the Pacers, what they did a couple of years ago, I think what happened a couple of years ago with the Pacers now in this current form speaks volumes about what their decision is that they have to do now coming off of the disappointment of Sunday night. And I'll tell you, because I always talk about precedent, there's precedent that tells you what the Pacers are about to do, which we will explain on the other side. Okay, I want you to go back to, in your mind, Eddie.
Where am I going back to, Jake? Because it takes me a while to get there.
I want you to go back to February of 2022.
All right, I got to get past 2 trips in Seattle, and a trip to Vegas. So give me some time here.
February the 8th, to be specific.
By the way, Fever vs. Storm tonight on the Fan, 8:45 pregame coverage. 9:45, sorry. Nathaniel Finch.
You're not doing the pregame?
I am going over to Cincinnati.
Taking in the Reds?
Yes, going over to God's country.
Okay.
Great American Ballpark.
By the way, you know William Henry Harrison?
I know of William Henry Harrison. I don't know him.
His resting place is right there off the interstate, right before you get into Cincinnati.
Yep.
Went there one time, coming back from the Guns N' Roses concert in Cincinnati late at night, and I wondered why the little tomb thing was open with the light on. I'm like, that seems odd. And I walked in, and it was like the 150-year anniversary of his passing. Either that or his birthday, one of the two. It was a little eerie inside the little thing, but it was cool.
What? Why am I going to November of 2022?
February 8th of 2022.
February, okay.
On February 8th of 2022, the Pacers traded Domas Sabonis.
That's right.
And they traded him for Tyrese Halliburton and Buddy Hield. Now, that is 3 1/3 years ago. And when that happened, the Pacers did something that I had mentioned on this radio program, but I had never necessarily known of it before. I've covered a lot of, and when we say covered, I've been a credentialed media member that goes and watches and then conducts interviews following games in the course of my career of the following franchises. I mean, a lot of colleges, but I've done it for the Indianapolis Colts. I've done it for the Indiana Pacers. I've done it for the St. Louis Rams. I've done it for the St. Louis Cardinals. I've done it for the St. Louis Blues. I've done it for the Kansas City Royals. I've done it for, I guess, in a small sense, the New York Rangers. I mean, a lot of teams.
What about the Pacers?
I said the Pacers,
you
right?
Did?
And I had never before had this happen. Not long after February of 2022, it would have been probably around this time of 2022, I got an email invitation to an informal finger food chat and get to know with the executives of the Pacers. And I got down there, and it was myself and other people who have a credential to cover the Pacers over the course of the year. And Kevin Pritchard was there, and Rick Carlisle was there. Actually, I take that back. Carlisle may not have been there. Chad Buchanan was definitely there. Kelly Krauskopf was there. And it was very cool.
Was either Simon, Steve, or?
No, the Simons were not there.
Okay.
But they came out and they said, guys, gals, we have a huge favor to ask of you. Okay, what's that favor? I mean, let me get some more of these shrimp because they're really good. The favor is we need you to be patient. And we're not saying that because we want soft media coverage. We're saying that because we are using you as the conduits between this organization and our fan base. And we need the fans to understand that of all times right now, patience is of significant importance. Because we have a vision of where we are going and who we're going to be, and it's going to look markedly different than the way things have looked. And Kevin Pritchard sat and said, you know, people kept asking, could we play together with Sabonis and Turner and Sabonis? And he said, and they're both wonderful guys and they're wonderful players. But I think we want to play a different style, and it more facilitates what Miles Turner does than Sabonis. So we made this move because we've been watching Tyrese Halliburton for quite some time, and we have another move that we can't comment on that we have made that is not yet official that we think will also help us. And that move was Obi Toppin. And so I would at that time I was doing the morning show with Kevin, and we had Rick Carlisle on, and I remember asking Rick Carlisle, so let me ask you, Rick, if it's a late season game against the Washington Wizards and you look down at the end of your bench and you realize that to win that game, it may be in your best interest to have your 5 most experienced players on the floor, but to win long term, it's better to get some of your bench guys on the floor to experience this moving forward and to build something off of it. Which way are you guys going to go with that? And I remember Carlisle said, well, that's a kind of a weird question or a weird way of asking it, but I expect no different, like from you, like kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. But that was the question mark where we were. It was a Pacer team that was getting beat routinely night in and night out and winning like whatever, they won 30 games. And you thought to yourself, I guess there is a long-term vision here. Well, there was. And they not only completely flipped their roster, they completely flipped the way they played, and they completely flipped their placement within this market. Because at that time, the Colts were rocking and rolling, and Jonathan Taylor was putting up Star Wars numbers, and HBO was following us around and coming in and running cameras on the regular inside of our studio and all of it. And the Pacers were the afterthought. And now the Pacers were right on the cusp of a championship, and it's only been 3 years and a third. And look how quickly they turned it around. And so when you look at what are the Pacers going to do right now, the urgency comes into people's mindset of they've got to make a move now. They've got to now, if Halliburton's out for the year, go out and they got to go out and sign Lonzo Ball. Or they got to get some fast point guard and just run with it that way, and they'll be right back to square one. And except for this is a franchise, this is a boardroom, this is a group of people who just sat through a rebuild of 3 1/3 year. So to them, what's 14 months? What is it? Sure, you're disappointed because, yeah, I thought next year the Pacers were going to be right there primed for the East, and instead they are probably going to be a 45-win team that finds themselves as a 6 seed. Okay. Because guess what? What was their record that season in 2021 or 2022, right? What was their record? The first and they had Nimhard, and Nimhard was a guy they're like, we really like this guy, and it's like they're talking about some guy that was like an early second round pick, and they're acting like this guy's like going to be something, right? They won 25 games. 25 games. Literally. 3 seasons ago, they won 25 games. So we're expecting them now to have urgency over sliding back 8 to 10 games next year because of the loss of their heart and soul. To this franchise, a year, while disappointing and while trying psychologically, is it actually that difficult? Because they've been through it before. 3 years? This is only a year. I think they stand pat and proceed forward. And then welcome back Tyrese Halliburton. We'll welcome back Scott Agnes next. search firms for coaches. You know what I mean? Like some college basketball program has a coaching opening and they hire some coaching search firm and they pay them $100,000 and then they come back and they say, we've determined that the 3 best coaches for you to hire would be Danny Hurley, John Calipari, and, Todd Golden. Okay, thanks. Right? Like, appreciate that. Earlier, I mentioned this, and we'll await Scott Agnes to let you know when we have Scott Agnes. Okay, so we'll get back into Tyrese Halliburton and some of the things that jumped out at me from his statement from last night. But joining us now on the Ryan Geist Brewery guest line, Scott Agnes is with Fieldhouse Files. Scott, first off, I'll begin by asking if you have seen some of the, and I'm sure it's a little bit disingenuous. Maybe it was just the area from which I was seeing it, but it looks like the Oklahoma City Thunder Parade has like 10,000 people there. What's going on there?
Good afternoon, Jake. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. It was the most subdued, quiet celebration in OKC, at least on after Game 7, than I could ever remember seeing. Even leaving the arena at 1 a.m., they were filtering people away, but it just wasn't a big deal, relatively speaking.
And I don't know if you heard this, Scott, or not, but I only know this because Shannon went to the game also, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she had sent me a message saying, okay, we're getting ready to get, to board to come home. And I said, well, what took so long? Because it was like 2 hours after the game. And she said that there had been, and it was not related to the game. It was not related to the game or the crowd of the game, but the hotel where the Pacers team had stayed right across the street, there was a shooting right across the street. And apparently that's why, as soon as that happened, and it was apparently totally unrelated to the crowd itself, and the person was not fatally injured, but there was a shooting right across the street. And then once that happened, I think that completely redirected in terms of the police in Oklahoma City of filtering everybody away from the area outside the arena. And I don't know if you witnessed anything like that or not.
I did not. I was at the arena probably 2 or 3 hours after the game wrapped up, right? So it was like 1 a.m. when I was walking.
What were their fans like?
First of all, just in general, the sweetest, the ushers, everyone was great to deal with. Had no problems. I thought it was very indie-like. Like these two fan bases reminded me of each other there. But I will say I was staying about 2 blocks away on the opposite side as the Pacers were, and I was headed back to town. I was a little bit stunned by the number of police presence. Like at the main stoplight right there must have been 5 police vehicles, and there was great urgency. It wasn't just we're here to block traffic. It was here to make sure we were on the way. And then I saw some social media post about some Pacer fans supposedly reportedly had to be escorted or make sure they were taken away from issues. Hopefully it was nothing serious, and maybe a lady was struck with a bag or something like that. But all in all, relatively, it was more subdued than I thought. I will say I asked a couple of people working at my hotel, and they said, no, well before you got back here, it was actually a lot busier, a lot crazier, but they pushed them to Bricktown, which is like 3 blocks east. There's where the river is and all of that, and they wanted it to be more contained over there. And now with your context, I will say that's the opposite side of where the team hotel was as well.
I will say, in watching videos of it after the fact, and this is neither here nor there, but I think it's worth pointing out, it did seem as though when Tyrese Halliburton got hurt, I thought, from what I saw, Scott, and feel free to disagree, you were there, so you would know better than I, it seemed as though the Oklahoma City fans were very respectful and very appropriate in their response to Tyrese Halliburton's injury.
Entirely. Everybody was in shock. They gave him a big round of applause when he kind of was dragging that 1 foot off the court. Yeah, from my vantage point way up high, I don't think there was any negativity or anything like that. It was shock, and much like the team, I don't think fans knew how to respond. And like many people have mentioned, we were all kind of blacked out there for the next 30 minutes from a basketball standpoint, just because of what transpired, and you knew the direct effects that it had both in that game and long-term with this franchise.
Okay, Scott, let's get back to the Pacers themselves. Afterwards, and we've talked a gabillion different ways about what took place there. Let's talk about what takes place now. And that is, I think the biggest question becomes, knowing that this changes your timeline and delays it by a year, and assuming, expecting, and hoping that Tyrese Halliburton is able to come back from injury. He had the surgery yesterday. The big question becomes that of Miles Turner and Isaiah Jackson, for that matter, but we'll begin with Turner. I think there was no question about the fact that Indiana's plan was to retain and re-sign Miles Turner and go into the luxury tax in order to do so. Do they do that now, knowing that their timeline is delayed a year?
Yeah, I believe that maintains their front on what they need to do. However, that said, I don't think they would be doing their job if in their conference room at the St. Vincent Center, if they weren't like, all right, guys, let's discuss what would this team look like if we did not, or what free agents are out there from the center spot, because obviously they need to add another point guard now with Halliburton being out. But that center spot is the one that's just unsettled. You don't have your starter. You don't have any of your backups. But it's a really weak center class. There aren't a ton of free agents. You won't have much competition to sign Miles in terms of monetary value. The challenge is what number will make both you and Miles happy. But I still believe that's the route they will go.
And with that, Obi Toppin also, I think, Scott, in other words, Toppin obviously is signed. He's, $15 million a year. But maybe they've got to give themselves some cap relief if they so do so. Do they experiment at all with their roster, or do you think they are run it back and wait?
I'm not expecting any sizable changes. Just tweaks along the margins, as they like to talk about it. They were obviously planning entirely to run it back. Maybe there'd be a change of one or two guys, but that's just about it. I mean, we didn't even see a ton of Minnick Mathurin. You didn't see Jarris Walker at all by any means. And so, yeah, the one thing you could consider is, do you move a guy for salary cap relief from a business standpoint? Because now, depending on what this roster looks like, if you don't believe you have a championship case next season, it would be foolish to go into the tax. That's why I actually didn't spend much time getting into it until this season was over, because you need to reevaluate and see where you're at. If they were coming off and you had a healthy Halliburton next year, you absolutely go into the tax. You were going to be best team in the East, at least on paper, the way in which everything has broken here in the Eastern Conference. Now it is wide open. But because it is wide open is another reason, though, Jake, I don't think you just completely say, hey, throw your hands up in the air. We don't know what next year's going to look like. Let's just get by next year. Thankfully, we got our draft pick and go from there. I don't think that can be the case because of how wide open it is in the East.
Scott Agnes, our guest. He's on the Rhinegeist Brewery guest line, Fieldhouse Files, where you can read his work. Scott, after the game, just aside from obviously the dismay of the Halliburton injury, what did you see in the emotion, the reaction of the Indiana Pacers?
Yeah, I first thing I noticed when the clock hit 0 is Miles Turner's hands went to his head, and he was just frustrated and disappointed, because he was the guy I looked to, the longest guy in franchise history. He knows this franchise as well as anyone, and I think he would be the first to tell you he didn't play as well as he thought in this NBA Finals, rather. That was one of the big disappointments, I think, overall. But yeah, it was just dismay and frustration, and they truly believed, and so do I. I think they would have won that game. The way in which that started, if it held.
Scott, I think
now you don't know how SGA plays, but
I think everybody in that building thought that, right? I mean, that was, and I listen. I there's a danger, and it's Eddie. If you could please cover your ears, because I don't want to spoiler alert you. Right? It's like when Andy and Red are sitting outside in the yard in Shawshank, and he says, look, I don't know why you're doing this to yourself, Andy, because, the Pacific's out there and you're all the way in here. You know what I mean? And, like, we can sit here. I don't know why we're doing this to ourselves, Scott, myself also, of wondering what could have. We're done, Eddie. You can take that. But because it didn't happen. He got hurt. He didn't finish the game. However, didn't it feel like it was going to be a Halliburton game? Didn't it feel like it was going to be a 35-point, 12-assist, 3-turnover game?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
it certainly felt that way, because when he goes off early, same thing with Miles. When those two hit early on, it's an indication of good things to come for them and the rest of that team. And he just looked comfortable. The fact that he here's what I've been saying, the fact that he felt comfortable enough to try to take that big burst and push off the leg was encouraging, because I'm not sure we saw all of that in the last game. It was more lateral movements and such. And so he clearly, I think, felt pretty good going into that game.
Scott, had you heard, I mean, we talked about it on this radio station. I think everybody was curious of, concerned about, whatever verbiage you want to use, the possibility that Halliburton's injury could become more severe and that the Achilles was in play. Did you hear that at all discussed, mentioned, or, scrutinized within the Pacers beforehand?
I mean, beforehand, yeah, absolutely. In terms of even Tyrese himself, he said, look, I have to do the research. I have to understand the risks that are at play, and I have to be comfortable with them. And so I thought he articulated that well. He said he met with a couple of specialists. He talked with his agents to get to the decision where he was to play. All of us that have covered professional sports at this point know, man, when you have a calf strain, this is what leads to it. And that's why it was funny. I wrote about it the day before, about how he had beaten the odds to even play in Game 6. It was 22 of 23 players during the regular season, Jake, who suffered a calf strain, missed at least one game. I think if this was a normal time in January, he's out for 3 weeks. They're taking a cautious approach. But who among us wouldn't want to play when this is potentially the biggest game of your life?
Of course. And you know what? And can you imagine what the narratives and the conversation would have been if he just had not played, right? I'll tell you who I felt bad for, aside from Tyrese Halliburton. And I'm going to get more into that coming up here, bottom of the hour, in terms of we're going to hear from Rick Carlisle and Halliburton in regards to what was said yesterday. But, Scott, one of the things that I felt bad for was Puma, quite frankly, because I happened to look at Tyrese Halliburton's timeline on social media, and one of his second or third most recent post simply said, it's got to be the shoes, because he was getting ready to release a new Puma shoe. I know that you do a lot of coverage at Fieldhouse Files in terms of like the business of a lot of these athletes. But just the visual of that injury taking place, where the only two things you see are his calf, his Achilles area, and then his new Puma shoes. And I thought, man, their marketing department's got to be absolutely devastated by that, right? Nobody's blaming it on that. I'm just saying, you get where I'm going there?
I do, although I will attest. I think the first thing you see is the pain on his face, and I can't get past that.
Well, but I'm saying when they zoom in on what took place, right?
Sure.
I mean, you know what I mean? It's like that is not the ISO of his new signature shoe that they were hoping to have out there.
No, for as well as it was for him to break out a brand new signature shoe in like 6 months after signing his deal. He did that in Game 1, had that game-winning shot, and to your point, that's when he carried those shoes, put them on the dais there, post-game press conference during his interviews. It was like you could not have scripted it better. Well, to your point on the other side, that you don't want that in the shot if you're them. No.
Do you believe the pain you saw was more physical or mental?
I think it was mental, because I don't think you feel it the intense amount of pain right away. I think it's mental, because what you also visually could see is no. And I think he goes, I knew this was a possibility, but I hoped it had not been. And this ruins all the potential, not just for this year, but he knew for the next year as well. I think everything came crashing down on him in that moment. It wasn't he was feeling. It was the loss of everything else, including basketball, one of his biggest loves.
What do you work on, Scott, now in terms of Fieldhouse Files? Obviously the draft is coming up. Indiana is not a main player in that. What is next for you in terms of coverage?
Yeah, so first of all, it's wrapping up still all we had there. I think one of the things probably that got lost, Jake, from Game 7 is a reflective Pascal Siakam like we have never heard before. He was asked one question to open it. He went in an entirely new direction, going deep and a little bit dark in that, like, hey, some of which we knew. Like, he lost his joy. He was upset in Toronto, wanted a new situation, and then was like, hey, look, came to the Pacers, had success, and it all started because of Tyrese. So there's that. I talked with Tim McConnell, TJ's dad, about his viral moment and his son going off, and a lot of different things that I'll be catching up on here, right? Darren Collison, I spoke with Darnell Hillman, who I believe was on your program as well over the last couple of weeks. So you have the draft. There will obviously have to be a story, Jake, about this new vision and what things could look like next year for the Pacers in this revamped Eastern Conference due to injuries. And then you hit free agency and what that looks like for both the Pacers and the rest of the league. Oh, and Fever, by the way.
Okay, by the way, Scott, before we let you go, and you tell me if this is correct. Eddie and I were talking about this earlier, and I'm a slow learner, okay? I'm going to put this in layman terms.
Okay.
When a team is going up against the salary cap, they can sometimes find relief if they have a player who is going into an injury where they're not going to be able to play for the entire year. The team can apply for, essentially, I'll call it for lack of a better phrase, like a voucher or a relief against that cap. That amount is either 50% of what that player who is out for the year would be scheduled to make, or roughly $15 million, whichever is the smaller amount. In this case, it would be $15 million because Tyrese Halliburton makes more than $30 million. So the Pacers, as a result, if they apply for this, that is not money they can use as a discount on signing Miles Turner, but rather they would get $15 million to spend on a player if they so choose to sign one for the year that would not factor into their salary cap. Is that all accurate?
What you're referencing is a disabled player exception.
Correct.
For a player who's lost to a season-ending injury. It has to be confirmed by an independent doctor and be granted by the league. And so, yes, you are right. They would be able to do that. Here's the other thing. And again, this is a thing I'll have to look into here for my story even more. But also insurance. Assuming he misses every game next year, insurance should pick up Tyrese's entirety of his contract next year as well.
But the insurance gives Herb Simon some relief, but it does not take away from their salary cap obligation.
That is my understanding. That is my understanding as well. Right. But here's the other thing to keep in mind as well in terms of luxury tax and potential payments there. You don't have to be underneath it by August 1 or the start of the season. You have all until next year. So here's the other thing. You could roll with this roster, see how you're rolling. And if this isn't a good season and you're headed elsewhere and you do need salary cap relief, that's where you could make a deal before the trade deadline or into the season to get under the cap, which would be a wise business decision, but it would directly impact the team.
Gotcha. Okay. Fieldhouse Files, where you can continue to read Scott's work and everything that he is working on with what is still a busy time for the Pacers. Appreciate it, as always, Scott.
You bet. Thanks, Jake.
All right, Scott Agnes joining us, Ryan Geist Brewery guest line. Speaking of guest lines, this morning, and I want to go back to this chronologically, and we'll begin with this. This morning, Rick Carlisle went on with the guys on the morning show, the fan morning show, with Kevin Bowen, Jeff Rickard, James Boyd. He does that and did so over the course of the year. We know that Tyrese Halliburton had surgery last night. We know that Tyrese Halliburton posted to the fans after his surgery. But in between the time that he came out of surgery and he posted to the fans, he had a phone conversation with Rick Carlisle. And Carlisle discussed that this morning on the morning show.
He answered the phone on the first half ring. And he said, "Hey, Coach, how you doing?" He sounded totally upbeat. And I said, I'm doing great. How are you doing? He goes, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good. And as I looked at my phone, I saw that he had sent out a message on our group chat of him in the hospital bed, smiling. He may have had a thumbs up sign, and that was to, all the guys on our roster, which included our bench coaches. And so that was a very uplifting moment for me. I've had several players that have sustained this injury. JJ Barea sustained this injury when he was in his 30s. He was a point guard. He's a backup point guard. One of the best backup point guards, for me in history. Dwight Powell sustained the injury when he was in his mid to late 20s. We dealt with this with Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman this season. Both of those guys have been back in the gym And it was interesting. I talked to James Wiseman's agent yesterday, and James has been authorized to do his rehab with us, even though he's not on our roster this year by the league. And I talked to his agent yesterday, and his agent said, "Look, the kid's doing great." I said to him, "How's everything coming?" And he said, "I did a 360 dunk today." And so, I mean, so amazing that Tyrese was out of surgery by the time, actually it was inside of 24 hours after Game 7 had begun. And so I can tell you that I feel very, very uplifted by the exchange with Tyrese on the phone, the message that he sent out, etc. It's a daunting thing, to go through something like that if you're the player. It's a daunting thing if you're a loyal fan base, if you're a great fan of the game, all those kinds of things, to witness what happened on television. And so very disappointed for the team that we weren't able to proceed beyond that moment in Game 7 without our full complement of guys. But certainly so proud of the effort. This team, I think we beat 3 teams in the tax, in the first or second apron of the luxury tax in the first 3 rounds to advance to the NBA Finals, which is, an amazing accomplishment. I mean, that speaks to the magnitude of the level of togetherness that this group had. It speaks to the moments, the unforgettable moments authored by Tyrese and Pascal, and the rest of our group. And so I received more messages during this run. I mean, this is going back to the second round, just randomly from people, just hundreds, as we proceeded through this thing. People just so enamored and enthralled with what they were seeing. And so could not be more proud of a group, and could not be more grateful for our fan base for their undying support of the team and the franchise.
After that conversation with Rick Carlisle, I don't mean the conversation that he had with our morning show, and we thank him for doing so all year long for this radio station, but rather the conversation that Tyrese Halliburton had with Rick Carlisle. Not long after that, presumably, is when Tyrese Halliburton posted on social media to you fans. And there were a couple of things when I read that struck me and gave me a sense of obligation, to a personal extent, of pointing something out that most notably jumped off the page to me. We'll let you hear what Tyrese Halliburton had to say and what I think was the most important aspect of it next. I mentioned earlier in the program, and I will do it again.
That I'm awesome.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
You know what we didn't mention, Jake? Earlier you were asking me like what day of the week it was, and I said I'd check the calendar. I shouldn't have had to check the calendar because it's Cluster Truck Lunch Day. It's Tuesdays.
You know what? And the chicken quesadilla was fabulous. How was your salad?
I had a Caesar salad. It was fantastic.
And I'll tell you what, you ordered it, and it was here like 10 minutes later.
I know. I
Evan
do
walked
want
in with
to
it.
toss this out there real quick. Evan Sherrill and his wife, as we highlighted a couple weeks ago, are being involved in a Birdies for Babies golf outing, and all proceeds right now, if you use the code BIRDIES25 at Cluster Truck, you get 20% off of your total, and that it will be donated to Birdies for Babies,
Outstanding.
which is to help parents that are dealing with infertility and issues of having getting pregnant. So if you want to do that, again, the code for Cluster Truck is Birdies-25, and it saves 20% off your total, and it goes towards Birdies for Babies for Evan Sherrill and his wife.
Outstanding. And Cluster Truck, the lunch was great. It was fresh. It was there on time. I mentioned off the top of the show, and I'm aware of it. I try not to be this way, but sometimes it's not that I'm trying to make something about me, but sometimes my experiences allow me to relate to situations or try to make them relatable. And that's exactly the case with the post from Tyrese Halliburton last night. Let me explain and read this to you. Tyrese Halliburton last night sent the following post. I think most of you by now have seen it, but I'm going to read to you a couple of excerpts from it. Man, don't know how to explain it other than shock. Words cannot express the pain of this letdown. The frustration is unfathomable. I've worked my whole life to get to this moment, and this is how it ends. Makes no sense. Now that I've gotten surgery, I wish I could count the number of times people will tell me I'm going to, quote, come back stronger, end quote. What a cliche, LOL. This sucks. My foot feels like dead weight, fam, but what's hurting most, I think, is my mind. Feels like I'm rambling, but I know this is something I'll look back on when I'm through this as something I'm proud I fought through. It feels good to let this out without y'all seeing the kid ugly cry. Indy, I'm sorry. If any fan base doesn't deserve this, it's y'all. But together, we are going to fight like hell to get back to this very spot and get over this hurdle. I don't doubt for a second that y'all have my back, and I hope you guys know that I have yours. When I read that, and there's more to it than that, but when I read it, something jumped out at me, and I felt it important to address. And that is the following. And this is where I say I'm offering this because it was relatable to me, not because I'm trying to make this about me. But my experience made me relate to something. It triggered something to me. I know that I talk in reference a lot about the fact that I'd had a heart attack, almost 5 years ago now. But when that happened, it was physically jarring, but it was very emotionally challenging. And I don't pretend to be an elite level athlete. I'm not comparing what happened to me to be that of, having an Achilles tear on live television in front of 17 million people watching for the world title. I'm not comparing it. But, and I didn't wake up the next morning because I don't think I really slept, but it was very surreal to me. And it was very challenging mentally to me because I'd never had any sort of physical ailment before. And now all of a sudden, my days of being able to always say like, oh yeah, when they start asking you about illnesses on an insurance form, of just saying like, yeah, I've never had a single thing wrong in my life. Those days were gone. And that was really hard for me. But one thing that stood out to me, we all have in our phone saved voicemails. A voicemail from your grandma that's no longer with you, or something from your mom just to hear her voice, or a friend that said something funny. And I have a handful of those saved. And one of them I have saved is from a woman named Shauna, who I went to high school with, grew up with. She's a year older than I, but we grew up together. And we were always very, very close through high school and college. And life gets in the way, and you kind of grow apart and whatever else, but, you stay in touch peripherally. And I'll never forget sitting in my bed in the hospital and seeing that I had a voicemail from Shauna and playing it. And I have it saved. And the reason I have it saved, as in no way, shape, or form meant as a disrespect to everybody in my life that reached out to me at that time, which I'll forever be grateful. But her voicemail, she says, almost off the front, "I'm sorry you went through that." And I've never forgotten that.
I wanted to catch up and just say that I'm so grateful that you're okay and sorry that you went through that.
That. I don't think I can ever emphasize to people how important it was to have somebody say that first and foremost they were thinking of how I felt. Because most people reached out to me to tell me how they felt. You know, gosh, I couldn't imagine what happened if you were, and those are all nice things and they were all appreciated. But it was like, that was I really felt this connection to that because I was like, she actually thought about and realized what I went through, which was 40 minutes of hell. She realized that. And when Tyrese Halliburton says in here, when he says, "I wish I could count the number of times people will tell me I'm going to, quote, come back stronger. What a cliche. This sucks." I totally understood that. And what I understood was a young man at 25 years old that was sitting there and that, like me, was realizing his vulnerability for the very first time and was absorbing the fact that everybody was just assuming that it was a click of the fingers, automatic, that he was going to get himself back to 100%. And what he is saying there is, I'm going to try everything I can. But what Tyrese Halliburton indirectly is saying in that message is, please don't love me less if I don't. And I think it's so important as fans, as media members. I don't know Tyrese Halliburton. I've met him. I've interviewed him. I know people who are around him a lot. I'm not one of them. We as fans, as media members, think that we know people because we see them on television. We hear them talk. But do we really know the person? And what I hope Tyrese Halliburton understands, and the peace that I hope he finds, and the thing that I hope for this city, this state, and this fan base is that we all say to Tyrese Halliburton, come back at your pace. Proceed through this journey in the way that is the best for you. Do it in a fashion that is the way you want to go about this. And don't feel like you have to go through this because everybody else wants you to. The true makeup of the comeback is going to be when Tyrese Halliburton is able to bounce back from this and rehabilitate and take care of his body and do all of the things that he needs to do, because he's doing it because he wants to be the best him, not because he wants to be the best pacer. And I know that that sounds weird, but I know this. You know, I'll never forget going to cardio rehab on the first day and saying to myself, because everybody was saying to me, like, man, Jake, you're going to be back running marathons before you know it. You're going to be back, but man, you're in such great shape. I can't believe this happened to you, but don't worry about it. You're going to bounce back in no time. And I'm thinking to myself, that might be the case, but I know that they woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to come in again and do a scan of my heart. And they're like putting, a thread through my arteries. So, like, you can tell me that I'm going to bounce back instantly, but I don't know that because it was pretty dire there. And then I remember going into cardio rehab and looking around and seeing all of these older guys with, the shoes on that they've been mowing the lawn in for 10 years and thinking to myself, like, I don't need to be here. And then I stopped and I thought, but I do. Because I'm a patient in a cardiological rehabilitation. And I can sit here and say I don't need to be here because I'm going to bounce back faster than everybody else in this room, but I don't know that. And it wasn't until I took peace with the fact and then embraced the journey in front of me for myself that I was able to go through it. And for Tyrese Halliburton, I am so hopeful that he understands and recognizes that when it really comes down to it, and I hope that I'm speaking for everybody when I say this in saying, I want Tyrese Halliburton to go through this journey for himself and not feel any sort of obligation, any sort of pressure to accelerate or feel like if he doesn't come back at 100% that he's let people down. The world works in mysterious ways. The body works in mysterious ways. We don't know. His doctors don't know. He doesn't know whether or not that Achilles will repair itself to where he will come back with the same burst, the same flash as he's always had. And if he doesn't, he's no less a person. He's no less a Pacer. He's no less a representative of this franchise in this city. But I think the first step to rehabilitation for anybody is understanding the importance in that moment of knowing that you have to do it based on the timeline and based on the mental approach that is yours and yours only. And when I read that, I read a young man who so desperately wants to come back for this city, and that's why we love him. And that's why he is a beloved member of the Indiana Pacer organization and why the fans have embraced this guy, because he's got a smile that's a mile wide. But right now, he needs to see a city with their arms a mile wide that are not saying, please come back to us as soon as you can, but rather saying, please take our hug and do what you need to do for yourself. And I think that's the most important thing. Couple weeks from now, right? I'll be Manchester, England, seeing them for 2 shows, Oasis. Eddie, you are tonight, am I correct in saying that you are on your way to go see the Redlegs?
I am, indeed. The debut for Chase Burns, the Reds' top prospect and one of the top prospects in all Major League Baseball.
Nice.
Against the New York Yankees. Rumor has it there may be someone else there.
Tonight?
Perhaps. Yeah.
Do I know this person?
The company knows this person, yeah.
Do I like this person?
I think you like this person.
So this is somebody that is a friend of the show?
Yeah.
Is it a Yankees fan?
Yep.
Are you going with Jimmy Cook?
No.
I saw Jimmy just got back from vacation, right?
Yeah.
His young son went to the beach for the first time?
Yeah, Chance and I think the rest of the Cooks went down to Florida.
Very cool. Obviously, pass along from the entire company our best Yankees and Reds tonight. I have not checked our baseball game in a while.
Well, while you do that, Jake, just a reminder tonight, Fever Storm, Indiana versus Seattle, 2 of my favorite cities going at it in states nonetheless. 9:45 pregame coverage right here on the Fan. Nathaniel Finch will have you covered with the pregame show, and he'll have the postgame coverage as well. John Nolan Briogas on the call. It's a big one, Jake, for the Fever in this regard, just because they have struggled to close games out on the road the last 2. They're back to 500, and in large part, these recent struggles for the Fever have kind of derived from their inability to shoot, specifically three-pointers. Like, they've made 2 3-pointers in each of the last 2 second halves, and they've turned the ball over a ton. Caitlin Clark, I think the number was 36 turnovers in her last 5 games. So that is a very staggering number that needs to improve, certainly against Seattle today.
Yeah, has not shot the ball well at all, right?
She's struggled dramatically the last 2 games. She comes back from that 3-week absence and has that game where she goes for like 32 points, somewhere around that. 32 points on 7 of 14 shooting from 3, backs up with 4 of 6. So she was 11 of 20 in 2 games, and then the last 2, she's 1 of 17. So it's only a matter of time, probably just the law of averages coming into play. So I would anticipate Caitlin Clark back to 23 points, 8 assists, 4 rebounds, and like 3 or 4 threes tonight. That's my expectation, at least.
That's your hope, right?
Oh, that's hope, yeah.
By the way, how does it, when you go to a Reds game, it's been probably 2 years since I've gone. Every time I go to a Reds game, literally every time, I think to myself, man, that is way closer than I would guess, like from here to the state. 90 minutes?
Depends on traffic. Once I cross the Ohio border, depends on where we're at in terms of construction. They're always doing something over there, their interstate infrastructure, so it'll depend on that. But 90 minutes typically, yes.
I mean, and every time, last time I was there, it was bobblehead night. Seems like every time I go there, it's bobblehead night. They're giving away bobbleheads to something. You want to know unpopular opinion?
Tonight, not a bobblehead. It's the special menu night. $3 beer, $2 hot dogs, $1 ice cream.
Ooh. Do you want to know an unpopular opinion?
Okay, can I have the area of subject and I can try to guess?
Go Reds game experience.
It's one of the best in the league.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that, but that's not where I was going with it.
Okay, what about it?
I feel like I should say this quickly and run out the room. You ready?
Okay.
Great America Ballpark, overrated.
Yeah, you can leave.
I don't know why. I don't know. Like, it just, to me, it feels like a cookie cutter. And I know that, Riverfront's the quintessential cookie cutter. I get it. But it feels like it was made with Legos. I don't know. There's just something about it that doesn't have a lot of character to me.
Shout out to Joe, who just sent me a text. He went a couple of weeks ago. He said construction is a freaking mess.
Really?
Yeah, that's what he said. He didn't say the other one.
Listen, I like, I grew up a huge Reds fan, right? And you know what? I'll tell you what I need to do Cincinnati-wise that I haven't done forever. Well, I want to know if somebody would go with me. I'd like to go for a day to Kings Island. But here's the thing. It's been so long since I've been to Kings Island. I think college was the last time I was there. And I read an article that the older you get, your body like doesn't adapt well to roller coasters. Like you feel everything. It's very weird. But so I haven't, like, I would love to go on the Beast again, but I don't know how well my body would do with it now, and I'd probably be sore as hell, whatever.
Well, especially with the sunburn, Jake.
Yeah, no kidding. But I want to know
how
how big Kings Island is. Like, when I was a kid, it seemed like a massive complex. Like, is it really, or is it like that Six Flags Chicago that you drive past on 294 that looks like the State Fair? Yeah, I actually don't know. John has arrived. J&V I sent J&V yesterday a fabulous picture of my sunburn.
Yes, you did. Hey, by the way, Kings Island for me, the last time I was there, you ready? June 1992.
That's about the last time I was there as well, because when I was there, John, matter of fact, it was right around then, the Whitewater Canyon it was like in its second or third year. You got
nothing like going there and getting your clothes all wet and then walking around and chafing all day long in 95 degree heat.
That's exactly what happened.
The worst.
Now,
a lot worse.
That's what Gold Bond is for. By the way, yesterday I was at the grocery store, and I'm at the grocery store. Two dudes walk up to me, nice guys, Justin, and he's like, hey, and he stops and goes, holy cow, J&V wasn't lying, man. You look like a raccoon.
Yeah. I told you, man. It looked like that hurt. Hey, by the way, 1992, June, I also went to a Reds game. Who was playing left field for the Reds? He was a multitasking player in the 1990s.
Let's say this again.
He was playing left field for the Reds at the time, but he was a multitasking player, meaning he was a Swiss Army knife of players in the 1990s for about 5 years.
Glenn Allen Bragg.
Much like Jose Oquendo was a Swiss Army knife for a number of years.
Billy Bates.
Not Billy Bates.
He was an infielder, right?
He's probably most noted outside of Gary Coleman as the kid from left field for playing left field and a variety of spots in the Padres organization prior to.
I should know this.
He goes by his first name's a nickname.
Heavy. Let me ask you: home run hitter or not a home run hitter?
No, slap hitter.
Okay.
Slappy.
Then that is a left fielder.
Speed, but he plays everywhere or did play everywhere.
Hit me.
Who am I talking about?
This is who you saw at Kings Island?
No, this is who I saw play left field for the Reds when I was over at a game.
Oh,
I also went to
sorry.
Kings Island and went to a Reds game. This is just my own little trivia nugget right here for you guys.
All right, hit me with the answer.
Bip Roberts.
I should have known Bip Roberts.
Bip Roberts. Nobody remember Bip Roberts?
Okay, how about this? I saw a Reds game in 1985. I remember Bip Roberts for sure. 85 or 86 with a guy that I think spent the majority of his career with the Royals, and I saw his first ever career home run, and it was a grand slam.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
Because they chose Larkin over Stillwell back in that era, if you remember.
Tony La Russa is still hated in St. Louis because they chose Royce Clayton. He chose Royce Clayton over Ozzie Smith.
Yeah.
And
Royce Clayton
ran him out
who
of
struck
town.
out Royce Clayton when he was a member of the Rangers? That is most noted in an early 2000s baseball film.
When you say film, you mean like it's a highlight?
Biopic, I guess, loosely based on
Gotcha, okay.
the guy's career.
And
Dennis Quaid played lead.
Oh, the guy for the Rays.
Yes,
Yeah,
Jim Morris.
Yeah.
I believe he struck out Royce Clayton of the Texas Rangers.
Okay, what Texas Ranger... Now, let me rephrase that. When Nolan Ryan threw his seventh no-hitter as a Texas Ranger, who did he strike out for the seventh? Who was a rookie at the time or like a second-year player? Future Hall of Famer, Toronto Blue Jays. Most known for spitting on somebody.
Roberto Alomar.
Bingo. Roberto
Thank you very
Alomar
much.
is indeed correct.
I know my spitters.
What's on the big show today, John?
We've got JJ, we've got Mark Kestisher, we've got Rakestraw, and we'll go over the Tyrese Halliburton stuff. And what Rick Carlisle said is prioritized, and they were planning on running this thing back all along. Yep. I don't think it's going to change.
I would agree with that. All right, John's up next. He'll be with you until 6 or 7 tonight. By the way, you're going to be at one of my favorite places this week, Old Pros Table coming up.
Yes, OPT's Tavern Tour Stop. You got to stop by?
I'm going to be out of town, but that is Shannon and I's favorite.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Providence, Rhode Island. I'm doing my road trip with my buddy.
Oh, that'll be a good time right there.
The
Providence.
Turhan Memorial road trip that we do every year.
That's
buddy
referenced
Byron
in
and
The Departed, that film.
I. Yeah, we're going to go there and we'll go in the Red Sox game. They're playing the Blue Jays, actually, as a matter of fact, but that's later in the week.
And my
John's up
team in the
next.
beer bet.
What's that?
Shout out
My
to Kelly
team in the beer
Gruber.
bet.
That's right. I'll be rooting against them, Eddie. John's up next. Thanks for listening to Query & Company.